and welcome to the Institute of Policy Studies online forum with Singapore changemakers on the topic of corporate culture and policies. This event is the last of a series of 3 forums that's part of IPS current scenario planning project called Reimagining Singapore 2030. The project is centered around the question, how will we achieve happiness, prosperity, and progress for our nation in 2030 and beyond? This in light of the current COVID-19 pandemic, but also mega trends that have been taking over the world before that in geopolitics, in terms of the global economy, in terms of science and technology, but also in terms of our concerns about how we are holding up as an egalitarian society, wanting to ensure that nobody is left behind. So to help us think about change, we've sort of lined up these forums in order to speak to people who are at it day in, day out. At each forum, we ask our special guests to talk about the change that has taken place in their respective domains over the recent years, the change they hope to see over the next decade, and then their reflections on that process of change making in Singapore. We've already had 2 forums. So the first forum was on well-being and belonging, which featured discussions about racial and religious harmony, aging, and such. Then we've had a second forum on sustainability and livability, when we talked about coping with climate change and climate crisis, as well as the idea of social sustainability, relishing and cherishing our historical heritage, but also the role of participatory design as we plan our city and get involved in creating a home that is livable and lovable. Now, here we are at the 3rd forum, and this particular forum will focus on change making in the corporate world of Singapore. It'll focus on the notions of promoting inclusive employment to ensure that all who want to work are not held back or discriminated against because of perhaps their age, their gender, their race, and even their marital status. We also want to talk about promoting sustainable employment. Having gotten into the workplace, what is it that we are, as corporate leaders, as corporate leaders out there, you do to ensure that your employees see a long career pathway to fulfill their potential? So this afternoon, I am really pleased to be able to present to you a slate of 4 advocates in these areas of work to understand what they've done and how they've translated their ideas and convictions into reality. More importantly, we'd like to discuss what more they think needs to be done in the area of corporate culture and policies and practices so that we'll see a flourishing of Singapore's human capital in a world that is still grappling with the pandemic, but looks forward to the day when we've seen the back of it. Since Sunday, we've also heard the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Hsien Loong, talk about various policy reforms towards the end of promoting inclusive growth. So I think this will also be an opportunity to listen to what our 4 advocates may have to say about those medium-term plans. So it leaves me now to introduce them in speaking order. Our first panelist is Ms. Carrie Tan. You'll recognize her as a Member of Parliament for Nee Soon VRC. She's here today, however, more importantly, because she's the co-founder or founder of Daughters of Tomorrow, where she's now a strategic advisor. Incorporated in 2014, 7 years ago, DOT or DOT is a non-profit organization that helps low-wage women achieve sustainable livelihoods and to help them be the engine of social mobility for their families. This is through DOT's skills training programs, job matching, job bridging, and support programs. We'll hear more of that from Carrie later. The second panelist is former nominated Member of Parliament, Ms. Chia Yong Yong. A lawyer by profession, we recognize her as a gem in Singapore for being an advocate for inclusive employment of people with disabilities and special needs. Ms. Chia joined the Society for the Physically Disabled. You'll see her logo there. Joined the board of SPD in 2004, served as its president from 2008 to 2020, and now is on its advisory panel. She's also a board member of SG Enable. Many will also recognize that she's a recipient of the Public Service Star, the Public Service Medal, and the President's Social Service Award for her efforts in this field of work. The third panelist is Ms. Junie Fu, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Methodist Welfare Services, a multi-service charitable organization in Singapore. But I think more importantly, she is currently the President of the Singapore Council of Women's Organizations, an umbrella body that brings together several social service organizations working to uplift the lot of women in Singapore. Until 2018, Ms. Fu was actually in the finance and banking sector, but even through that time, she was founding co-chair of an initiative of the Singapore Council of Women's Organizations called Board Agenda. Board Agenda has the goal of raising the awareness of economic benefits of helping more women to be members of boards of our corporate bodies in Singapore, and the necessity, therefore, of harnessing this human capital by generating a solid pipeline of senior women to take decision-making positions in the corporate world, profit and non-profit in Singapore. She continues to be a member of the Young Women in Leadership Connection, and she's a member of a newly formed body which is called the Council for Board Diversity, the patron of which is Singapore's President, Madam Halimah Yacob. We hope to hear more about the work of the Council when we speak to Junie. Last but not least, our fourth special panelist is Mr. Sandy Montero. Mr. Montero is the founder of Rebel Girl, or better known as just Rebel, which is a city-based eatery that provides a very special model of employment and entrepreneurship for its team members. We look forward to hearing more about it, but it might be useful to know that Mr. Montero takes up this niche in the difficult F&B sector amidst this pandemic from a background of having been a senior executive in the music world. He was regional president of the Universal Music Group that represents Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, Beatles, and more. So I think with that background in the corporate sector, it's interesting for him to now pivot to this space of F&B, and I'd love to hear more about what motivated him. He has a very special premise undergirding Rebel, which is that the F&B sector holds out the promise of a more equitable, more cooperative model of hiring and partnering a workforce in order to grow a business. So as we, as I've sort of now introduced our four special panelists, I hope you'll allow me to just kick off this afternoon's program by asking you a quick question, right? Can I invite you to talk to us about the most significant changes that have taken place in your area of work or activism over the past years? What role did you play? What role did your organization play? And in the case of Sandy, I think talk to us in your case about what motivated you to start Rebel and what's different about it. So maybe I could invite Carrie to kick us off. Carrie, please.
Hi, Jillian. Hi, afternoon, everyone. Really glad to be on this panel to share a lot of my thoughts, hopefully, about this topic, which I've been very passionate about. So Daughters of Tomorrow, in the past few years, in our work trying to access and bridge underprivileged women with jobs that they could juggle with their care responsibilities at home. It was a very, very arduous process, right, and journey. But roundabout in 2018, we figured, through the stories of the women, that one of the key barriers to these women attaining jobs and holding down jobs in the sectors such as F&B, retail, hospitality, service, etc., which they were very eligible for, was the fact that these companies operated in shift work. So they would have to like morning, afternoon, evening shift, and often the shift allocation is in constant flux throughout the week. And that presented a tremendous difficulty and challenge for them in terms of arranging for their caregiving needs and childcare needs at home. So around, I think it was about 2018, 2019 when we discovered this problem, we decided to try to influence our employer partners to adopt what we call core and stable scheduling, which was to allocate a fixed shift for this employee and have that shift be a permanent shift so she can also have permanent arrangements for her childcare. In the beginning, we met with a lot of resistance because it's such a new practice, and companies had questions about, is it fair to other employees, etc. And we drew on research that Gap, the international clothing label, has done in other parts of the world, and their pilots to show to employers that it can be done. And a few brave companies decided to take it on and try it. And I think in a short few months, if I didn't remember wrongly, the numbers evade me now, but I think we got really good traction. We had about like 40 or 70 employer partners who adopted core and stable scheduling across many sectors who traditionally functioned on rotating shift work. And this really enabled the women to take up and sustain those jobs. And this is one of the key milestones that I'm very proud of in terms of getting employers to do and change and believe that they could do. And I think the organization now has created a momentum and they're continually enrolling new companies like this. Sephora, the makeup company, has adopted something like this. Vanguard Healthcare has adopted this. And many local F&B chains also have adopted this. So that is one of the key milestones, that it is possible, right? And I think in now my capacity as a member of parliament and strategy advisor to DOT, I'm not so much involved in DOT's activities anymore on an operational level, but I'm continuing to plug myself into the corporate and HR community to propagate the different best practices that has come across my attention when speaking with various SMEs to try and get more SMEs onto the bandwagon of progressive workplace practices. All right, my time is up. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Carrie. Now it's over to Yong Yong. Can you do the same and share with us, some of the milestones in your advocacy work with people with disabilities, much like Carrie shared with the work she's done with low-wage disadvantaged women. So over to you, Yong Yong.
Thank you, Jillian, and good afternoon, everyone. I think I would like to start with a piece of good news, and that was, if you don't already know, on the 27th of August, just a few days ago, 88 companies were awarded the inaugural enabling mark by President Halimah Yacob. And that is the first national accreditation that benchmarks and recognizes organizations that for the practices and outcomes in disability inclusive employment. Now, why is that such a happy event? Well, because it signals to us that employers are coming forward, but more than that, it signals to us that conditions are now changing for more inclusive employment. It just, as I was preparing for this, I can't help but remember how it was when I was trying to get a job upon being a newly qualified lawyer. I couldn't get a job. I was jobless for 6 months. I think I was one of the last in my class to get a job. And primarily the issues were with biases, with infrastructure barriers, and with employment constraints, given the nature of the legal sector at that point in time. But now, what has happened? What have we achieved just over the last 30 40 years. We share the slide, and as you look at the slide, I will just go on very quickly. I think we've achieved greater acceptance with public education efforts, and that's really been done a lot by SPD, SGE, and a lot of other NCSS and many of our SSA partners. We are definitely enjoy increased physical and transport accessibility. You see people on wheelchair and with different kinds of disability in public transport, and you will see us in different buildings. Greater access to education. 2019, I was part of the compulsory education implementation committee, which extends compulsory education to children with disabilities. There is now, unlike in the early days, an ecosystem to support employment. And this is an initiative of SGE and government-funded agencies such as SPD, MINDS, and ARC, where we work together and we help to train and place persons with disabilities in open employment. You see that there are many government schemes supporting employment of persons with disabilities. There is a lot of support and advice for job redesign, for job attachments if you're not ready to employ, offer internships, for job placement, and even after you have employed anyone with a disability, you can get job support from the professionals and of course from the government. So what am I sharing all this? I'm sharing that the world ahead is something that is exciting for us because the way is being paved. How was this actually possible? If we look at the significant national milestones over the past years, we've got the enabling master plans. And I'm very proud to say that we implemented our enabling master plan even before the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was launched. So that was what we had starting 2019, 2005, the first, we're in the third now, and we are working on the fourth. In 2013, July, we signed the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This has greatly impacted the employment landscape, and I think it's given us a lot of optimism on how we can move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Yong Yong, and I hope that we'll have the opportunity to kind of delve deeper into that journey. Now let's pass the time over to Junie, and Junie, tell us what's been happening in your space, especially as you look at greater representation of women in boardrooms. Over to you, Junie.
Okay, thank you, Jillian, and thank you for inviting me to talk about this. You spoke specifically about board agenda, so I'm going to share a little bit about board agenda and how it all came about. And we were talking about how I was watching grass grow. Well, the board agenda was established in, really launched in 2011. But before that, we did some groundwork because the numbers were showing that we were sorely lacking in female representation on corporate boards. So at that time, when we first started, it was about 6.4%. And we were wondering, how can this be, with women so educated and having so much work experience? And so we decided to advocate for to have more female representation on boards, and also to really show the benefits. It's really beneficial. It's a talent retention issue. It's a human capital issue, isn't it? Especially when in Singapore, it's 50-50. Our female representation in the workforce has also grown from strength to strength. In fact, in 2021, this year, the Grant Thornton report showed that 33% of women were in senior management positions. But if you look at the board representation, it is still sorely lacking. It's like 18%. So it doesn't really translate into board representation. At that time, it was far worse. And so we launched it. And to be really honest with you, one of the first group of people to resist this were women. Yes, and they said, Junie, why are you doing this? Why don't you help the poor? And yes, but I really felt at that time and still now that, with more women in decision making, it really changes the landscape. Like inclusive policies, inclusive human resource policies, like Carrie, what you were talking about, and even what Yong was saying, that women tend to look at things differently and just enrich that whole experience on the board. So that's what Board Agenda has been doing for the past 10 years. The numbers have moved, although they have moved rather slowly. And we are at about 18% now. So I'll just stop there as we invite more questions and maybe comments, and I'll hand it over back to you, Jillian.
Thank you, Junie. I hope there will be opportunity to talk more about not just women in boardrooms, but at senior management level, as well as the general discussion about women in the workplace. And I think, I'd invite Carrie to weigh in, Yong as well. But no doubt, Sandy, you're also going to be able to come in on that conversation. Meanwhile, let's cast the time over to you, Sandy, to talk a little bit about what motivated you to start Rebel. What's different about it? What is so rebellious about Rebel? Over to you, Sandy.
Thanks, Jillian. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this esteemed group. The story for Rebel actually began more than 20 years ago. I mean, from a young boy washing dishes in a restaurant in Sydney to pay my university fees. And then having the opportunity, or a fortunate sequence of events, to have two people who identified something in me that I didn't see in myself, that created a pathway for me to become the president of the largest music company in the world, running one of the biggest geographical regions of that company. So Rebel started from an idea of creating an entrepreneurship platform for young people. So the same way somebody created the opportunity for me, could I create something that would create a runway for 5, 10, 50, 100 people, 1,000 people? And if they had the drive and motivation, they could achieve far more than I have ever done. And it's like a little bit like a circular kind of paid forward thing. So the idea behind Rebel was looking at the F&B business and thinking there were so many shortcomings with regards to fairness. Rich people who had the money would invest in franchise or brands, and they would sit back and watch their money grow. In the meantime, the people that actually did all the work, right, they would work their boots off, trying to earn money for their families, and they needed the jobs and they worked hard because they needed the money. But if they served 100 customers a day, they got paid $7 an hour. If they served 1,000 customers a day, they got paid $7 an hour. If it was 100,000 customers a day, they would get $7 an hour. But in the meantime, the investors, who all they did was just put money in there, would reap all the benefits. So there was an intrinsic sense of, there must be a better way. There must be a better way to do this. And that was where the whole idea of what Rebel became. So Rebel wanted to create a platform that treated the employees differently. So rather than just having the employees who worked on an hourly wage, I wanted to create something where if they had the drive and motivation, we would create a program that would make them part of the ownership of the brand. So we weren't interested in getting franchisees who hired people just to work for them. We wanted the employees to be part of the franchise ownership. And the more successful we are, the more successful they were, the more opportunities would come up from there. The second part was treating our investors as a group as a whole, which means you don't just buy a franchise and you run your franchise, and then Jillian will buy a franchise and she runs a franchise, and neither cares whether the other franchisee lives or dies. They just want to make sure that they survive. By being all co-owners of the brand in total, every investor cares about the success of the brand as a whole. And the third part was regards with suppliers. So everybody in the F&B business wants to run a cutthroat business where how much is a carton of eggs? If your price is 10 cents less than the other person. Thank you very much. Thank you for the last 2 years of relationship. I'm now going to the cheaper person. Why is that the right way to do it? Why can't the suppliers be part of the program to help the brand succeed, and you in turn work to make sure that the supplier succeeds? And that's where Rebel treats its suppliers as partners. And one of the most active partners we have is in meat-free development, and corn has come in as one of our big supporters to help the brand grow. So rather than just being an F&B business, we want to be an F&B business with a difference.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And that's sort of really cutting to precisely how you've designed the business to how employees are remunerated, and they're not employees, the kind of part of the whole enterprise and entrepreneurial team. And then you're looking at how investors view themselves and your connection with suppliers as well. So thank you for sharing that. I hope that, the audience out there, you're sort of feeling, getting a sense of how special this group is, and what they are trying to do is also kind of an interesting swimming against the tide type of endeavor. And so I'm going to invite you to share your comments as well as your questions. As I go to another set of questions with the panelists, I hope that you'll share with us yours so that I can cast them to our panelists and have them engage you directly. So please go right ahead and send us your comments and questions. Meanwhile, Carrie, I have another question, and this is really tied to our project Reimagining Singapore 2030. So if we reimagine Singapore for low-wage workers, disadvantaged women who are nonetheless wanting to be part of that engine of social mobility for their families, what is that vision that you have? And what are one or two things that you might have to blast out of the way in order to achieve that vision? Feel free, let it rip, Carrie.
Yep, I love that question. And I think one of the key things that I'm really watching very closely, and I think people are cognizant about, is the fact that we have an aging society. And what that presents to us is that women like myself in the sandwich generation, where we could have kids, we have elders, are increasingly going to feel the pressure from what I call a care and career conflict, where we're expected to be at work, we're expected to show up at our best at work, but we're also, trying to show up for our families, etc. And of course, there's a whole conversation about ungendering care, so that men also do some of this care work. But I think the main barrier here, I think, is this current paradigm where we have a society or economic system that tends to view workers as producing outputs, units of outputs. And I think we really need to shift away from that paradigm to think about how we can harness the best of people, not just based on what they are doing or producing, but based on the value simply by who they are. And I think Sandy shared a beautiful story about him washing dishes in Sydney, and somebody saw something amazing in him. And that was not by a function of what he did. He was washing dishes, but it was a function of who he is or who he was that got the attention. And we see so many stories in Daughters of Tomorrow's community, in our residents community, where, when a company hires someone, not just based on what they do, but something special in them, their personality, the way they approach life, the way they approach working with others. I think this is where the true value to businesses come in. And I've spoken to many HR professionals or team managers or leaders, and across, I think we're quite familiar that the most draining thing that you have to do or manage at the workplace is people dynamics. And people dynamics is often not stemming out of what they do because they could do their job really well, but because of how they are relating and interacting with one another. And managers spend so much time trying to mediate that. And I think the next lap of really fully harnessing and tapping on unleashing our human capital potential is really how can we grow and nurture our people based on certain intelligences, certain aspects of who they are, rather than an over focus on training the hard skills, which at the end of the day, at some point down the future, machines can take over those things. So what it means to be human, and what it means to bring our humanity, our whole person, and what we can contribute based on our roles in our lives to the jobs that we're doing, I think would be I think a transformation that I'm hoping that the corporate sector can spend some time thinking about and pondering.
Thank you, Carrie. At this point, panelists, is there anything you'd like to say to what Carrie said? Can employers actually see the person in the employee? I think, Sandy, please jump in first because you were referred to. And I think that you have a model that allows for this, right? So over to you, Sandy.
It's a very interesting point because you are only limited by the opportunity that you're given. So at the time when we were launching Rebel, it was at the peak of business boom in the F&B business. This is prior to COVID. Trying to hire staff was next to impossible, that I was so desperate that I just took anybody. If you had the desire, we would give you the chance and make it work for you. Many a time, they just came because they needed a job. They didn't actually see what the opportunity was, right? We managed to scrape together a launch team. 6 months after we launched Rebel is named as one of the top sandwich shops in Singapore by Time Out magazine, something that we've held for 3 years in a row. We have an average rating of 4.7 or 4.8 stars on every food platform or even on Google search. I mean, Rebel has done ridiculously well. And when you think, more than 80% of my staff had zero F&B experience to begin with. And now these guys are best in class. So it really is about giving people the chance to be more than they see themselves to be. And exactly what Carrie is saying.
Yeah. And Yong Yong, do you find that among the employers who've just been accredited, recognized for their part in trying to foster inclusive growth, do you have any stories of employers or organizations looking well past the disabilities of the people that you're serving at SPD?
Yes, indeed. I think first they had the mindset of innovation, and they were prepared to say, not just that, okay, we are taking in people with abilities. I think what was important was they recognized that they were taking in employees with disabilities. I think that important recognition allowed them to innovate the work processes and to even use and harness technology or create apps and so on, in which they were able to facilitate the work of the employees. And of course, there were other employers who looked at an employee and saw their potential beyond just the usual ironing clothes, washing of dishes, and they were able to go beyond their starting roles into slightly like supervisory roles and so on. It started because the employers had a vision and an ambition for the employees. And you know what? It made business sense. I've never had an employer who came and say that, we did it right, but we lost money. There may well have been unfortunate cases, but most of those who came to us have actually said it made a lot of business sense. So it isn't just charity.
Right. That's important because we've had one question come through Facebook now. And I think maybe you can continue on that vein. The question is, how do we avoid tokenism when we talk about diversity and inclusion in the corporate setting? So Yong Yong, say just a little bit more about how, with that ambition and vision as well as innovation, some of these companies have not just done a tokenistic nod and gesture about including people with disabilities. Have the beneficiaries found that these are real jobs, creating real value because of some of that willingness to take them seriously? And then I'll ask Junie to jump in. Yong Yong, kick us off.
Yes, I think that willingness to be taken seriously is indeed very important and very, very motivating. People know when they are not taken seriously. People know when it's tokenism. And when we reach out to employers and when we train our folks to take on certain jobs, we work very closely with employers to ensure or to create a culture of acceptance and understanding and a culture of cooperation. So the last thing that we want is to have a failed employment. And what again I want to assure employers is you don't have to walk this journey alone, because you can always reach out and there will be resources. And you don't have to say, I didn't know what to do.
Thank you, Yong Yong. Junie, over to you. Valerie,
yes.
Valerie's question, how to avoid tokenism. I think you've mentioned that there's been progress, but are people just sort of trying to check the boxes?
Yes, and I think we really should avoid that. And the premise really is the best person for the job. I think that's important. It's not about, oh, I need to hire a female, oh, I need to hire somebody who is physically disabled, that. But really, the person who comes, even if she's on a wheelchair, right, and she's good, let's hire her, him or her. And I like what Sandy mentioned about you're only limited by the opportunities that you're given. So for us, or any one of the participants who are listening in, if you are in a position to hire, I think we should really hire inclusively. I think that's it. It's about giving opportunities so that the capable ones who can get a break in life. And sometimes that's what people need, a break in life, really. Another thing about the organizations, Yong Yong, you were talking about how now 80 organizations have been accredited. So we did a study with TAFEP, we as in Board Agenda and TAFEP some time ago. And 25 senior ladies said the same thing. It was their organization that enabled them to succeed. So the organizations recognized their capabilities and built career pathways around their seasons of life. So they were able to have children, build their family, and also succeed in their job roles. And I think organizations should really look at that. I mean, reimagining 2030, right? As organizations, we should really look at that. So it's not about building more walls. It's about building longer tables where more people can have a seat at the table.
Right.
Yes.
Just wanted to add to this thing of tokenism.
Please.
It flows both ways. So if the employee thinks that they're just there for a token, they behave like they're there for a token. If the company operates like they're there because they will be given recognition for doing this, they will do it only for the recognition that they've done this. The true value of this opportunity is hunger. If the employee has the hunger to succeed, if the company has the hunger to develop an opportunity, that is what will drive success. Tokenism will never drive success.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. There's yet another question, this time directed at Junie, because our starting premise is that actually with greater gender diversity and representation of women on boards, that there would be more inclusive policies, right, from HR to everything else. But a question from Eve Lowe is, hello, is that just an assumption that is a bit wobbly? Why do we assume that by having more women, that they themselves will take on what she said, this noble mission of ensuring that policies of the organization are designed to be inclusive as well? So Junie, kick us off on that one, please.
Okay, wow, thank you for the question. You see, it has to be a lady to ask the question. We tend to be more hard on ourselves, I must say. Women tend to be hard on other women. I think that's another panel discussion. But I think with women having that experience, we do hope that in terms of decision making or policy making for HR, for example, they would also give some thought and consideration in how to have flexi working hours. Should we also have childcare leave together with parental care leave? Can we put them together? Do we have to discriminate against single ladies, because there are some older single ladies who are giving care to their elderly parents, and they do not have that leave. There's no childcare leave, there's no parental care leave. So we're really hoping that with more women, for example, in the HR sphere, they can also give thought into that and recommend policies that would help women who are giving care to the elderly as well. So of course, an assumption.
Okay, so over to Clary, who's dying to jump in on this. I mean, is this a false premise that having women, they'd be more attuned, more empathetic to what women need? Or do you see enlightened men also taking up this agenda? So, Clary.
Well, I wasn't so much going to comment on that. I was going to comment on something that Junie said earlier, but this question kind of is a really good segue to that. Junie said earlier that, hey, some people just need a break in life. And when she said it, it was in the context of what we were discussing before, that people need someone to believe in them and to give them an opportunity. But related to this whole piece about flexible work arrangements and leave to care for family, etc., it's also the same thing. Like, some people just need a break sometimes, right? Because of care responsibilities, how overwhelming it can be, because of mental health. I think we know already by now that 1 in 7 people in any given, I think, in our society is going to experience a mental health condition at some point in their lives, right? And amongst the single mothers, single parents that we've come across, 1 in 4 have struggled with a mental health problem, have had mental health struggles, right? And I think this thing about giving your team members a break, how do we do it? I mean, all employers want to do it, but why is it so difficult, right? And I just wanted to share an example from when I was running DOT, and we still function today, where everybody had the flexibility to work anytime they wanted, anywhere they wanted. And then when we started to grow a little bit bigger, we realized that the teams needed to meet. We would say that, hey, each team just picks one day in a week that you want to come into office. The rest of the time, we could just remote work. And it worked really well, beautifully for our organization, because whenever somebody needed to take some time off to care for something in their lives, the other team members would just back them up. They would chip in. And I had a close friend who was running a different organization, and they were struggling to make this possible because, like, somehow, the corporate policy was such that only certain people were allowed to work from home. But this was pre-COVID days, right? And then other team members don't feel very balanced about it. So I thought that the lesson from here is really important, that if we wanted to implement flexibility, it has to be extended across the entire organization, so that the employees don't feel like they're getting the shorter end of the stick because they're single. So when married people with kids go on leave, then they have to cover more work. So it has to be very egalitarian in that sense, right? So that there is a sense that the culture is such that people will have each other's back whenever somebody needed to take some time off, and it doesn't become like a very calculative experience. So this is something that I thought was really important to share, that people need breaks, and how do we do it? I also would like to share about a tech startup, which become hugely successful now. And they have a similar policy where they have a day or an afternoon, not a day, an afternoon, where the entire organization does not have meetings. They're not allowed to have meetings with one another. So they get a break from meetings, and they can go do their own stuff, like they can do their deep dive work, etc. And it only works if the entire organization does it. So so some food for thought there.
Well, thank you. At this point, I'd like to cite a question that Mavis McAllister has shared. This is for Yong Yong, and it relates to Carrie's point about needing to ensure that when you do design the policies that, these are sort of spread out across the organization. So Mavis McAllister asks, how do you create a culture of acceptance so managers and leaders look past disabilities and not consider the people with disabilities mafan or difficult?
Okay, thank you for the question. And
I wonder if that managed to get through.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I just
bounce
wanted
off what Carrie said just now, and using kind of Mavis's question to apply that to people with disabilities.
Yes, I think indeed the culture is very important, and the culture is not just something about what's coming down from the top or what's going up from the bottom. At the end of the day, I think that employing someone is actually a statement, a value statement made by the company. Who you engage, how you treat your employee tells people a lot about what the company is about. And I think if we are going to talk about how to shape the culture of the company, it starts definitely with management sitting down and the founders to find out, to talk about why they wanted this company in the first place. Beyond that, I thought again that we shouldn't go beyond disabilities. I think we should talk about the disabilities of the people that we want to engage, because it is something which gives to us the sense of reality, the reality of the difficulties and certain expectations that may not be met. And it will then lead us, if it aligns with our values, it will lead us to explore job redesigns. It will lead us to discuss with our employees, our fellow employees, how to accommodate and how to work around all these limitations. If all we were thinking about is to ignore disabilities but to look at the abilities, I doubt very much that we would be able to create sustainable employment at all. And culture, as we all know, is something that's going to happen overnight. It really starts with the values, and it continues with a lot of action and a lot of commitment on both sides: employees, employers, and people with disabilities who wish to be employed.
Thank you for that. Sandy, you've been in the big corporate sector. You have that background, but you've also now decided you have to set up a different corporate sort of body in order to do what you really think is important in terms of inclusion and sort of giving people a stake. The dollars and cents of it, do you really need these changes to come through a board, draw on what you know from the past, or you have to actually redesign the whole organization, as Yong Yong may have suggested, unless there's some kind of subtle cultural change that takes place, at the top. What are your reactions, Sandy?
There's an undervaluing of good leadership. Leadership will determine the culture of the whole company. So like I said, we talked about tokenism before. We just did things for grants or whatever. That was why you did it. Then nothing changes. The structure that you have will stay the same. And unfortunately, with a lot of our career employees who work 9 to 5 and they keep their heads down and they just want to do what they do, they get very jealous. They get very hurt when they see things happening and they're being overlooked just because somebody is given preferences or allowances or time off to have a break. They don't understand this, and it's incumbent on the leadership of the company to actually make everybody understand that we survive We win, we lose as a team. We win and lose as an organization. So if everybody becomes calculative on the littlest things that annoy you, or the littlest things that actually create friction within your organization, then regardless of what policies you put in as part of your HR workbook, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It comes down to good leadership, where the company understands the philosophy of what they do, why they do it, how they do it, and the employees are part of that program. And if you have a very rigid structure where the employees cannot accept it, then you need to change the structure, or you need to change the employees where everybody understands what the philosophy is. Otherwise, you're just not achieving your objectives. That's my 2 cents worth.
Right. Thank you. It does bring us back to Junie's agenda, isn't it? You have to get the right leadership. So is diversity in leadership important? Junie, you want to jump in then next, Carrie?
I just wanted to share that. So this is the MWS hat, the Methodist Welfare Services. We do have wheelchair-bound employees. We have a staff, and she is deaf and mute, but they are doing great jobs, and we want to have more of them, because employment, as we said just now, is empowerment as well. So I think it's something that we hope to build into the whole value system of our organization. I thought I'd just share that.
Yeah, thank you. Carrie? Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to align with Yong Yong, because I fully agree with what she said earlier, that we don't want to look beyond. We want to really look at, because I think back to the point I made about the mental health thing, right? That it's going to be a pretty common phenomena. I think in the past couple of years, I've had numerous young interns come, and there's a good number of them who struggle with some mental health challenges. And I think we cannot ignore it and try to hope that they can be performing like everyone else. I think what is important is to recognize where the limitations are and plan for and around it. So, for example, my partner's organization, they hired somebody who was blind, perfectly capable of coming in to work and holding up her own. And they had an employee who had bipolar disorder. He would fall asleep at his desk sometimes from medication, but he was able to deliver good work. And I think I was having this conversation with the CEO of IMH, Professor Daniel Feng, just yesterday. And I said, do we have any studies about, for example, how many days in a year is somebody with bipolar disorder likely to be functional versus not functioning so well because they have relapses? And I think when we understand the conditions, we understand the parameters around which they are able to contribute, then we can plan for their contribution and plan so that those times when they could be down, or those things they may not be able to contribute at, could be covered by other provisions or other team members in the workplace. I think that is the way to make things work.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let me pick up on Lucas Monti's comment, and let me just try and put out what he's trying to say. Basically, the mainstream of the corporate sector, if they were to hire on the basis of meritocracy, is still kind of held back by the focus on academic qualifications. This makes it even harder for alternative people, hiring practices for HR to look past disabilities or look at disabilities and the backgrounds and things like that. So the question is, what do panelists have in terms of suggestions for the HR practice in Singapore to kind of promote the hiring with kind of the, to promote more diverse hiring practices? Yeah. I think we've been talking about this. We talked about the leadership level. But really, there's a fixation with academic qualifications, and then it really is a stumbling block. So, how have the companies you've engaged sort of been able to get past this, especially the progressive ones?
Maybe I can chime in here because I used to be a headhunter in my earlier life and I worked very closely with HR. And the phenomenon of looking at the job description that your business unit hiring manager gives you if you're a HR person, and then looking at the resume and trying to find the matching keywords to hire, that practice, I think is still very much the same now as, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. It hasn't changed. So I think it starts with the HR profession being trained with business awareness. Perhaps like HR personnel could be rotated in management trainee programs, for example, right, across different business units, because I think the ability to understand to some extent the nature of the business unit and what they require will help them to better assess the suitability of a candidate beyond what is the obvious, like, the degree, the major in the degree, which often have no bearing on the person's experience in their profession or their career, right? So I think that would be a helpful way to help HR professionals be better equipped to make hiring or recommend hiring practices, or be the ones to embark on hiring practices that are not fixated or based very much too closely on the academic qualifications. And I think the HR sector, the HR profession has a tremendous role to be an advocate and to be the change maker in this, because it is precisely this kind of prior practice of looking at academic qualifications that's causing a lot of stress on our students in the education system. Parents are just worried about whether their kids can get a job, right? And if people started hiring people regardless of whether they had a degree, but based on who they are, and their passion and their interests and what they love to do, then I think the pressure on the academic system and in the education system for our students and young people would ease off. So I think the HR sector is a critical stakeholder in this piece.
Right. Thank you, Carrie. Yong, you kicked off by saying that you had graduated with a law degree. And so even with the academic qualifications, there are still a lot of stumbling blocks. So we talked about the leadership level, we talked about HR practice. We also said that policies that accommodate people are different, but differently abled and able still have to be propagated across the organization. What do you have to say on these points, on this approach? Yong, over to you. Do unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. I think it is important that we recognize that the purpose of work in the context of a company is to achieve certain outcomes and to achieve certain impact. So I think that that's the first recognition. The second is that work evolves. Work description and specifications evolve and has changed over centuries, over decades, and now over years and months. And if we have these two as our basic principles, I think we would first be prepared to recognize that we could reorganize and redesign our work to suit and to harness the talent and the abilities of the people within our team. And if we also value the dignity of every person, and if we respect each person who comes to us and works with us as an equal, I think we would also be able to harness and motivate that person into harness the talent of the person and motivate and nurture that person into somebody who's better. So to me, I think aside from the leaders and the co-workers taking the lead, I think it's important that the HR plays that role to be prepared to redesign and to split up the work according to the abilities of the team.
Thank you. Junie, what is that value proposition you kind of try to get your the women leaders you place on boards to present to their organizations, to sort of tell them to kind of be creative, do something different, identify what you're trying to do, but see that there are several ways of doing it, and apply some innovation to bring in the full complement of human capital that people all over Singapore can offer?
I guess it's not only the women, right? I guess anyone in senior management position, the HR, they should look at workers as talent. So in MWS, we are reorganizing our whole HR really, and it's about talent rewards, talent retention, talent acquisition, talent, so they are talents that we want to invest in. Everyone has a proper career pathway, competency frameworks, and really is to build the staff up. And I feel that if organizations can have that kind of mentality or that vision, I mean, I'm very grateful. I did not have any social service sector experience, right? Right, you were right, Jillian. You were introducing me. I was a former corporate banker, and hey, suddenly she is in the social sector, and I'm grateful for that. It took a chance on me, isn't it?
Right.
So we need to take chances and give opportunities to people, and just like what Carrie and Yong said just, and even Sandy, totally no F&B background, and now, right, you have a cohort of professional F&B people that you have built over just a short period of time. And I think that is what, going back to reimagining our corporate and culture for 2030 Singapore, we really need to look at things this way and be really boxed up in the traditional way of hiring, firing, looking at academic results only.
Right.
Sometimes you need that hunger.
Yeah.
I tend to look for people that are hungry.
That's back to you again, Sandy.
I think Lucas
don't just feed the hungry, but you're saying that we need to ourselves be hungry.
Be hungry.
Find organizations that are creative.
Lucas asked a very, very good question because, and both Carrie and Yong touched on the point of the relevance of HR in this whole process. I mean, everybody who has a good corporate position worries about losing it. The HR guys worry that if they put up candidates that don't fit the brief, they'll be questioned on how good an HR person are you. You didn't even tick all the boxes. This guy doesn't even have a O level or whatever. This is the part of the problem. There's a culture where everybody is trying to cover their own butts, if I can say that, and ticking off the meritocracy, education, academic box is quite an important part of that. I mean, the truth is, and having met a lot of these people in the music industry, a lot of young people do really badly when they're in school because they have no interest in academics, but are creative, are talented, are motivated, are driven, have got amazing ideas for marketing, right? And if you hire them purely on what grade they got in mass media at the university, right? And that's how you grade them, then you are doing yourself a great disservice. I mean, how do you access these people? I don't have a short answer rather than giving them the opportunity to sit in front of you or work in front of you for a couple of weeks or a couple of months where you go, wow, that guy is really good. I mean, the current chairman of Universal Music globally, a guy called Sir Lucian Grange now, I don't think he went to university. He was a radio plugger. He was a guy that went to radio stations asking them, please play my song. And now he's the chairman of the biggest music company globally. So what is the answer? The answer is, I don't know. You have to have some mechanism where HR takes more effort than just vetting CVs purely on academics. There must be some process where these people get seen. If they're not seen, you're not going to find them.
And their value unearthed from just, from spending time with them, right? So, Carrie, you're going to jump in before I go to the next question.
Yeah, I fully appreciate the challenge that Sandy just raised, right? That there's an expectation if you're an HR person that, hey, you got to do your job a certain way and then you got to tick the boxes. If not, the hiring manager may not buy it. So I always thought that, and one thing that I made myself learn by putting myself in the deep end of things was pitching, like sales communication skills. And I think if we could equip HR professionals with that at a very early part of the training, that they would be able to communicate the value or the perspective that they see why this candidate would be a good fit for the job based on her understanding and communication with the hiring manager. I think most business managers would take a chance on it. They don't just want to be shoved and enter an interview with someone who they don't see on paper and they don't know, right? I think HR can play the role of an advocate for individuals. If they can spend the time and are willing to spend the time to understand from the hiring business manager what they really need and spend the time to see the shining spots in the candidate's profile beyond the academics, they could make a pitch. I think this pitching skills is critically important for anything that we want to do, including pitching people forward for opportunities that they really otherwise would not be able to have. And I think that therein lies the purpose of the vocation, right? Do you enter the HR profession because you wanted to do administrative work? Or do you actually want to be in a role that empowers and enables people? So I think, going back to that purpose could help maybe inject some motivation for a lot of demoralized HR professionals to think about what are some of these new skill sets that could be really helpful for you to find meaning and purpose in your roles.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And really, for the HR practice in Singapore to be a bit more meaningful, I think we said we need the right leaders as well to give them license to do that and to unearth the value within all sorts of people. Ernest Eng asked if this conversation could please include the role of ex-offenders. So is there anything else you would like to add to this sort of thread of discussion about, looking at and looking beyond also, people with some easy labels? Yeah. What would you have to say about the role of ex-offenders? I think one or two of you would have interesting stories to share.
I think it's an objective of what does that person want to achieve. If they want a new start, they want to prove themselves, then why shouldn't they be given opportunity? I mean, the truth is, you will then make your path forward. If you're given the chance and you do extremely well, then your past no longer matters. It's your future. And I think this is the basic issue. I actually talked to quite a few people with regards to hiring people with past records, and they will say, "Oh, you don't do this because they are like this, or like this, like this." It doesn't matter. You just need to find the right people who really, really want a chance to make a difference in their own lives and the lives of their families. And if you find these people and you give them the chance, then they make their future. And
There's
if they do, they make your future as well.
Right. Yeah. A process of step-by-step trust building too, I suppose.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this one, we're embarking on that in a way because after I've exited myself or stepped out from executive director role at DOT, I've recently been involved in being steering advisor for a new nonprofit called Rise Community that focuses on working with men who are currently marginalized from the workforce. And this community would have some ex-offenders in there. But I think the learnings that I got from DOT would be quite applicable because it's about stigma. Right? About, whether a single mother feels like there's a stigma about her as a single mother or an ex-offender, either experiencing or perceiving stigma in their workplaces. I think what is really important about enabling the success of taking on an ex-offender at work, even despite, you having given them an opening chance, is the willingness to be patient. And this sounds really fluffy, but I'm telling you, this is the formula. It's about unconditional love. Because the psychology of and the experience of this community is such that they're unable or they need a healing process with the community before they can believe that good things can happen to them. And sometimes they may perceive innocent actions or behaviors or words as being affronting. They're quite sensitive to that because they've had so much, probably experienced so much abuse or rejection in their lives, that they find it hard to, maybe even believe the nicety of people. And it's really about walking with them through their emotional ups and downs, and building that trust relationship, exactly like you said, Jillian. And it takes time. It takes that willingness to say, hey, you could be reacting to something, but this was not what we meant. And we really, appreciate you and all that. So there's a lot of this softness and soft skills involved in walking the journey with these employees. That would be, I promise, it would be super fulfilling, even though it will be a little bit challenging or arduous, but that patience would go really a long way.
Okay. Yeah.
Jillian,
Please go ahead. Yes.
we do have someone who was an ex-offender as well, and he's doing very, very well. In fact, we reached out to some of the social service agencies that look after drug offenders, former offenders, and we say we want to give them employment. Yes, and so we are trying to place them as well, because we want to tell them that, look, this is a place for second chances as well.
Yeah.
So
thank you for that. Talking about advocating for these people who deserve second chances, or or people with disabilities. Back to the questions and comments we've been receiving. Jeremy Arodas and a few other people has said, back to the issue of people with disabilities, what is SG Enable? What are the organizations doing to advocate, to promote, the hiring of people with disabilities? And how are employers incentivized to do so? Are there any training grants to help with that? And I guess, it's over to you, Yong. Just to get into a few of the details about what's the ecosystem that there is at the present time, and who are the advocates for the people with disabilities, and so on. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Jeremy for the question. But before I answer that, Jillian, do you mind if I jump in on the earlier question about
the of course, please go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, I think I agree very much with my fellow panelists about how we should give everybody a opportunity and a break to start a new life. However, I also think that pretty much in the same vein as how we would employ people with disabilities, I think it's also important for us to approach this in a balanced manner. What I mean to say is that a person should not be discriminated against simply because the person had a record. However, the work or the job that is to be offered to the person should not be one that could cause a person to fall into a known weakness. So in other words, we should not put ourselves in a position, or we should not offer a temptation to our potential employee. And I thought that's something which, again, HR and leaders should think about in how they could absorb employees with records into their workforce, and yet allow them a healthy environment in which they could grow, overcome, and then mature into higher roles. So that's just my 2 cents worth. Now, coming back to Jeremy's question, indeed, there are many schemes that are available. And what's a little bit disappointing is that despite our promoting and announcements on social media, in mainstream media, somehow many employers don't seem to be aware that they're actually available. Some of the schemes available, for example, for employment specifically, would be the Open Door program, where you could get, where employers are subsidized. They can apply for a grant to render a workplace disability friendly in order to accommodate the employment of a person with disability. That's the enabling employer credit, which is a wage offset for the hiring of persons with disabilities for up to 6 months. And there is an additional grant if the person had been previously unemployed for more than 6 months. There is the Workfare Income Supplement for low-income persons with disabilities, Workfare Skills Support for the same group of people, and the Job Redesign Grant that provides subsidies to equip homes of employees with disabilities for telecommuting. And then on-the-job training grants, job growth incentive. And in fact, under the job growth incentive, we have we have 1 billion Singapore dollars set aside to encourage locals, right, to hire to encourage employees to hire locals. And under this scheme, a person who is disabled, if hired, will result in the employer obtaining a 50% subsidy of the salary. A grant up to 50% of the salary of the employee with a disability for 18 months. So I think it ends next month. So start hiring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
In addition, just one last point, and that is that there is also a grant to render old buildings accessible. And again, this has been not very, very popular with building owners. So that's also quite regrettable.
Right. Thank you. We have resources dedicated to do better. So thank you for setting them out. Eugene of NIE Yong says, what does SG Enable do to raise national consciousness of all people enabled differently, amongst employers? Says, since you're on the board of SG Enable, just add a few more words about how you're, how SG Enable is getting the word, getting, the fact of these schemes and the advocacy for people with disabilities out. Yeah.
I think when we designed the Enabling Village, what we wanted to have was a space where people could come and see how they could live and in a community that is accessible and open to everyone on a universal basis, regardless of whether you were young or old, whether you had a disability or not. Moving from that, we also took on employment as a main chunk of the work that we have. We do not have a discrimination against age, whether you're young or old. We have 3 agencies that work with SGE, SPD for people who are physically and who have sensory challenges. We have ARC as well as MINDS. So again, it's not a specific age group that we look at, but across all with functional disabilities. So if you have people who are elderly, vulnerable, and with a disability, they will fall within the services that SGE and the partners provide.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Now, back to everyone. Jeffrey Ng and Chinju have, sort of offered some questions and comments about whether it might be a good idea to, have more internships available for people with different profiles to kind of be there, and I guess add to that the kind of HR practice that we were just talking about. So what's your view on, just the making internships more available? Add to that, it's also about preparing the rest of the workforce in the organization to receive people of different profiles. So that's what Chinju's added in his comments there. Yeah. Back to you, whoever would like to take this up. Carrie?
I'm going to do a plug for Dollars of Tomorrow.
Yes.
I think they've recently embarked on what they call a greenhouse program to encourage corporates, our corporate partners, to provide internships and apprenticeships to women. Well, because we've seen that due to the educational, I think, constraints and limitations, they often find that the women are in the low wage sectors and jobs, and we really want to help the women get access to higher paying jobs in the corporate settings, in office jobs. They really like office jobs, very glamorous for them, but they may not have had the opportunity or exposure before, so it's very scary and intimidating for them. So corporate partners, we're looking for corporate partners, believe, to provide these internships to the women. And so that's something that we are doing. At the same time, the second point you mentioned about preparing the workplace environment and the workplace community to receive with these, what I would call maybe special employees in a good way, because they're there to perhaps impart and share very different perspectives with us through their own lives, etc. I think what we've been doing very well at Dollars of Tomorrow is we run empathy building workshops through sensitization programs for bosses, for HR people, for supervisors, any ranks that of employer partners who are interested to hire from our pool of talented women. So I think it's really important that the preparatory and orientation of employers is also a critical part to make this employment relationship a success.
Thanks for sharing that and sharing about your program, Carrie. Yong, anything you want to add?
Yeah, thank you.
Internships.
Yes. So SGE conducts internship initiatives with various organizations, and we collaborate with RISE to provide mentorships as well for our students. SGE also runs transition to work programs. We cover from school to work, hospital to work, sheltered workshop to work. SPD collaborates with institutions of higher learning to provide internship for students as well. So I think this gives very good exposure both to the companies as well as to the students. And we hope that the internships actually translate into future employment, and that has actually happened for some of our students, and we're very happy about that.
That's good. Good to put the word out there, and also pair all this with the empathy training that Carrie was talking about. Sandy, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, this is
hire people because they are different.
No, this is a blast from the past for me for internships, because being in the music industry beforehand, I mean, it's a very, very desirable job for kids out of school and university, and everybody wants to be part of the music industry. And I remember that we had a program, I think we had about 12 or something like this as a maximum per period, and we'd get full requests for internships. And the thing that running internships is that you must make sure that the interns get a value of what they need to know in order to take up a career in the business. And the people that you appoint to look after the interns and indoctrinate them into the process of the company must also be well versed on why they're teaching the interns, because the interns come and go so quickly that a fraction stay, right? The others go and do university or do something else like this, and they leave the whole process. So they're just there to take up space, but they don't actually stay within the business. So the people that are actually given the responsibility of passing on the role and responsibilities of working in industry have to be well briefed on how to actually teach this. I'll give you a very simple example that's going to age me tremendously. This was the day when all the record reviews were in newspapers, right? And there would be big articles on your artists and the music that they did. And what I used to do was I would get a weekly report where all these articles were cut out into one folder and put on my desk so I could see how well the team was doing with regards to publicity, right? And it was almost robotic. Every Monday they would come in and they'd have all these newspaper cuttings and taking glue and pasting them on paper. And of course, that was a hated job, and all the interns were actually told to do it. They didn't understand why they were doing it, other than the fact that, oh, the boss wants to see this every week, right? But they didn't understand why. Why was it so important to see this? And one day I walked past this group of interns doing this newspaper cutting, and I asked them, why are you doing this? And they said, oh, because so-and-so told me to do this. So they don't actually understand why they're doing it. They just know that they have to do it. And I sat down there and I said, the reason why you do this is because if I was to spend money, let's just say Taylor Swift, right? If I was to spend money and take out an ad in a magazine or a newspaper, every square centimeter has a value, right? Whatever I can get written for the artist for free is money we have saved, and we can basically put it together towards other marketing for the same artist to publicize it even more. So every inch of paper that you've cut here has a value. So your job is to understand what that value is, and later when you take on a role of actually pushing publicity into the magazines and newspapers, you understand why you do this, because what you do has value. And you can see the light bulb goes off in their head that, oh my God, I get it now. So when we talk about internships, anybody can run a program for internships where you have hundreds of people, circulating through the company at any given time, and they have no intent of doing this in the long term, because they're going to go to England and do law, or they're going to do something. And it's my mom called my so-and-so, and so-and-so works for the company, therefore I got the internship. That is not internship with value. Right? So I used to lecture at one of the big music colleges, and I used to open Universal Music for internships for anybody from that college. And like I said, we had 12 at any given point in time. And somebody asked me, none of the other record companies did this. Why do you do this? I said, all these people have actually gone to a music college. They want to be in music. That's the first thing. They want to make a career out of this. I said, when you do your internships with me, it's an internship for 3 months, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm taking the pick of the bunch from the music college, and they're going through a 3-month interview. Mm-hmm. So if you change the philosophy of how you actually run your internships with the intention of actually hiring the best out of the bunch who did the internship with you, then internships are of immeasurable value.
Wow.
Right? If you do it as a system of circulating young people to the company and forget it. It just has no value.
Right. Thank you. And while you still have the mic, Sandy, tell us a little bit about also Rebel's kind of philosophy about human talent development. I think so there's something that you're trying to also do differently in Rebel.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like I said, when we first put up the ads for hiring people, I mean, everybody just wanted to get some money to cover costs or family or whatever it is. Nobody actually comes in with the idea of, oh, in 5 years, I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to be doing that. They think that when they come in, and they come in as outlet staff, right? Taking orders and cleaning tables. They come with the intention to apply for that job, right? At Rebel, that's not what we want. Mm-hmm. We need you to understand why we do things a certain way. We need you to understand why we are so fussy about the way we make our sandwiches. We need to understand why wrapping it in a particular way is so important, and why you must wrap it with pride, right? Because this gives you a grounding in the philosophy of what the company represents. But Rebel has ambitions. We already have requests for franchise in 2 countries around the region, right? When Rebel franchises and we go to Indonesia, for example, who's going to teach the Indonesians? The same people who started as outlet staff are now going to become regional representatives or regional trainers going around here, there, everywhere. I want to create a path of success where if you prove yourself or you show yourself to have the ability to do more and be more, then I want every opportunity to come to you. And that's the story of Rebel. I mean, I don't want you to be an air stewardess just because for the rest of your life, just because you joined as an air stewardess, right? If you had the chance to become a pilot, you've got a chance to become the regional logistics controller. If you have the ability, make it happen. Mm-hmm. That's part of the policy of Rebel.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that, Sandy. Junie, anything you want to add to this before I cut to other comments and questions quickly?
Oh, I mean, hearing Sandy speak, I want to join Rebel.
we want to introduce many more of the people we know to Rebel.
Yes.
I mean, my biggest regret is with the damage of COVID. I mean, Rebel is a small organization. I mean, we had ambitions of being in Malaysia 2 years ago and Indonesia this year, right? All of that's been pushed back 24 months. I mean, and you know, if it wasn't for the government grants, I think Rebel would be dead. You know, so we are hopeful. We have a story that people are interested in. We are hopeful that the kind of motivation we're giving our young people drives them to do more and be more. I mean, I'll give you a very funny story. Last Friday, we had a corporate order, right, for a company, right, and they wanted 50 deliveries to 50 locations around Singapore, all within 1 hour. We don't have that ability, so we use all the third-party platforms we could figure out to get all the deliveries out, and we were still short. And my staff turned to me and said, "You have to deliver the rest." So as the most senior member of the company, my most important value to the company was a delivery dispatch of food, because my staff were more capable of organizing this order going out to 50 locations. So I had more value as a driver than I did actually helping them run the company. And this is what makes me very, very proud about my team.
Thank you for sharing that. So real quick, let me dash through a few questions and comments. Just pay attention because you may want to respond to them. I won't direct them. First, there's a question about whether there are soft skills needed to affect the kind of paradigm shifts that we were talking about, whether it's at the board level or leadership, certainly at the HR level. So how do you kind of effect this sort of shift, says Valerie Ang. Another question, let me just read this off by Eddie Lee. Divides due to religion or party interests are growing in many countries. How do we handle such subtle issues in recruitment? So that's another one. For Yong Yong, because you did sort of mention something to do with the international community, Thelma K asks, how have UN treaties like CEDAW, you know, the Convention Against Discrimination of People with Disabilities and things like that, helped to actually create the opportunities that you've been talking about and deal with discrimination? I wonder with the PM's announcement about making TOFEP law, whether there's going to be that aspect of dealing with discrimination against disabilities. I think that would be really quite far out, maybe a 2030 vision, but whether you have hope for that. So that's another question. There's Chris Gee asked that, so there's so many ways for companies to do good. What would the panelists suggest a company gets started on to just kick off this journey of trying to foster more progressive and inclusive employment policies? So anyone wants to weigh in before I kind of close out with a few questions about your own journey in change making? Yeah. Anyone wants to start? Carrie, soft skills.
I was going to tackle the the hiring bit about religion and
Yes,
party differences.
I guess partisan views. You could.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised to hear that, and maybe I haven't come across any stories around that. I would actually really love to know more about any kind of incidences that have happened because of, or people experiencing, not being hired because of their political views. Of course, personally, and I think as a country, we would not condone any form of discrimination along religious or partisan lines, right? I think people believe in hiring for their merit, what they can contribute. And I believe what PM announced at the National Day rally about the Anti-Discrimination Act will go some way to hopefully address that if it does happen, but also send a very strong signal that this really should not be happening. I would be personally very keen to hear if there were encounters of non-hiring because of political views.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not obvious to me, and I think that is a very concerning thing to happen in our society.
I guess this is also the week where we've taken a further step in terms of inclusion on the faith-based front with the announcement that women donning tudong, women will be allowed to don tudong in healthcare. But I suppose we'd of course love to hear more examples of cases or incidents where religion gets in the way. Anyone else wants to respond to the questions or comments? Yong?
Thank you. Yeah. I thought a quick comment on the paradigm shift. We've been talking a lot about as leaders and HR and the company, but I thought it was important also for me to share that people with disabilities should also be prepared to acknowledge that there will be difficulties in employment, that they do have limitations, but be very, very aware that they have abilities. In other words, I would like us to all be realistic about ourselves, what we can do and what we cannot, and not to have, and to understand that when we join a company, it is also incumbent upon us to fit, to assimilate into the culture of the company. So it takes both to make employment work. And it's not just an issue that is specific to people with disabilities. It's basic employment common sense, right? Everybody goes into a company and we accommodate each other and we assimilate. But I think we do, in the process of our job support and counseling, we have come across difficult issues that are faced by people with disabilities, and we have had to share with them that sometimes there has got to be a giving of way on our part as well.
Okay.
And it doesn't always happen one way. And I think that's important for us to share with employers, because we don't want, employers to think that every employment becomes a burden to them.
Okay.
And it should be.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And then moving on to the question on the discrimination, right? I think the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities does have non-discrimination as one of its guiding principles. In fact, there are 8 guiding principles. So when we ratified the convention, Singapore is committing to non-discrimination against persons with disabilities. Will we ever have a specific piece of legislation against discrimination other than what PM alluded to? I personally do not wish to see that at the moment. I do not think that you could legislate against discrimination as much as you could legislate to love. What we need to do is to work within the community between ourselves, to know that it's not necessarily another person's problem. It could happen to us, somebody we love, anytime, any day. And because of that, if nothing else, we will not and we refuse to view another person who is differently.
Right.
We continue to respect the person and we continue to nurture the person. And that is where I think we could become stronger as a people. There have been countries that have legislated employment quota, but you've seen how companies have just been either prepared to pay the penalty or they've just employed people with disabilities on a token basis.
Right.
That's not what we want.
Yeah.
We want real value to the person, to the employee, to the employer, to the economy. Okay. Yeah. And so moving forward, The Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities will continue to, I can't speak for the government, but I'm very sure that it will continue to guide us in all our planning. It's guided, even before we acceded to it, already guided the master plans. It will continue the enabling master plans, and it will continue to guide the enabling master plans as all the main master plans of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Junie.
I think for a paradigm shift, really, it has to be intentional and top down, bottom up, because we do need the rest of the staff as well to embrace them. So it has to be intentional, and it's not going to be a silver bullet. Obviously, it will take time for organizations to really get the HR right, the policies right, to tell the employees, look, we're going to, everybody is going to be hired by merit, even with physical disability. So I think it should be intentional.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Over to you, Sandy. Any responses to the questions?
I think that I wanted to touch on the issue of soft skills. I mean, soft skills are so important, not just from the work environment, but just as people in general. It goes back to the whole HR question of meritocracy and academics and all. It's all part of the same issue. If you follow a formula or you follow a tick box kind of situation, and that's how you judge everybody and that's how you make everything work, it's probably not going to be a very nice environment.
Right.
So the soft skills on every part, whether it's on a leadership value, HR value, workforce value, but even as the employee themselves, there's a shortage of soft skills everywhere. And if this is to change, then we need to do something that actually inculcates more elements of soft value and soft power with regards to getting what you want and moving things forward. I think that's the sign of a developed society.
Wow. Yeah. So let's. I know time is pressing, and we need to close. So let's close by asking you. I mean, you all are people with very clear soft skills. Tell us, in rounding up, something that would encourage or inspire the people who want to make change out there happen. What's your message to them? Just as a parting shot from our forum today. Let's start with Sandy, and then we'll close with Carrie. We go the other way around. Sandy, what do you have to say about yourself as a change maker, or anything you want to say to change makers?
It's really funny. When I started this in the F&B business, people went like, why do you want to do that? There's already a formula, and just make as much money as you can. And the bottom line is, I said, I think what I'm doing is good business. Being encouraging of my team and creating young entrepreneurs is good business for me. Having suppliers as partners is good business for me. Having investors who are vested in the brand as a whole and not their own investments is good for me, good for business. So it's just about a different perspective. It doesn't mean it's wrong, it doesn't mean it's right. There are many, many ways to succeed, and you choose the path that works for you. I guess that's all I can say.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. It's integrating it all together, being back in touch with what really matters, and it be good for business, you're saying. Thank you, Sandy. Over to you, Junie.
So gender diversity is good for business. It is true. It is an economic imperative, really, and it's really beneficial to have more senior women leadership in the pipeline. Mm-hmm. Because really it shouldn't be a zero-sum game. I must say I'm an accidental change maker, if I can say that, because I just thought that the numbers just didn't measure up, 10, 11 years ago when I looked at the numbers, and I think we should do something about it. So at first it was really to create that awareness. Hey, did you know that our rate, our percentages are so low in terms of female representation? And that's how I got started. Yeah. And really, it wasn't about women's liberation, chest thumping. But really, it's about human capital. It's about talent retention, and having the best people on the boards will translate into a better organization.
Right.
And
so removing structures and practices that hold us back from flourishing, the flourishing of all human talent and capital. Fantastic.
Yes.
What is your number for 2030, by the way?
2030 is supposed to be 30.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. 30 what? Why don't you spell it out?
30% female representation
on boards in Singapore. Right. Thank you. Thank you, Junie. Over to you, Yong Yong. Your parting shot.
I talked about not being able to find a job for 6 months.
Yes.
It was not easy to find a pupillage or internship when I graduated. I had my pupil master, Mr. Harry Lee, he took me in. When I couldn't find a job and I had completed my internship, he continued to allow me to intern until I found a job. He called his former pupil and said, if there's a job opening, remember Yong Yong. And I found my first job finally, and it was not a high salary, but I took it on because it gave me the break I needed. I needed to prove that I could do it. And I worked very, very hard. And then the pupil, who my pupil master called, she rang me a few months later and she said, Yong Yong, I've got this other job here. It's a lot better than doing litigation. Would you like to come? And I said, no, I just got a job. And he said, no, come. You've got to do this. At least you don't have to go to court. And so the story continues. You see? And I then became truly a lawyer. So what I want to say is, you've got to give people a chance, right? Start with internship. Move on to employment. If they're hungry enough, and if they really want to, they will do very well. And you will not regret it. It will make economic sense for you, and it gives a sense of contribution and value to us. What I've always said to people with disabilities, if Yong Yong can do it, so can you. And all we need will be the community of all of us working together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to remember that somebody gave you a chance.
That's
Think
right.
back. And so would you also give somebody else a chance? Yeah. Thank you so much for that inspirational note, Yong Yong. Over to you, Carrie.
Hi. Okay. So we're talking about change making, right?
Just to close up.
Just to close up. Okay. Well, what I've gotten from my journey so far is, and we talked about soft skills earlier, is that we need a mix of both soft and hard. And what I mean is we've got to be really strong and firm in our personal belief of the vision of the future that we want to create, that you have to pursue relentlessly. But in the process of pursuing this, when working with others, with stakeholders, with partners, it's so important that we are soft, that we be flexible, and we be patient, and we be adaptable in the process of working with others. And if we are confused by what it means to be having soft skills, I have one go-to thing that you can always do and always fall back on, and that is to remain curious, have curiosity, replace judgment in any given moment that you encounter challenges with others. And then I think naturally, when you're curious, you will discover things and also discover the solutions to them quite naturally. So I think that would be my take. That being curious makes one a good collaborator, and collaboration creates change.
Thank you for that. I think this forum has been really chicken soup for the soul, but also has a very hard edge to it, which is that if we choose to take the time to sit, we will uncover the treasure within each of us, which makes good business sense, to really find the human capital and talent that is out there to be nurtured and developed. And it's good for business development, good for a sense of corporate loyalty and commitment, which is what accounts for business success. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, your views, your philosophies, And audience, thank you for taking the time to join us today, but also taking the time to join us at the 2 other forums that we presented thus far. Please fill in the feedback form that is available so that we can improve what we present to you, audience, that it's not just food for thought, but really, ideas to act upon. And, of course, our panelists sharing that we can turn our beliefs into action and reality. So with that, let me wish you all a very good evening, and to take the first step to be the change that you want to see and want to see happen in Singapore going forward from now till 2030. Thank you, and goodbye for now.